Hey guys, tonight we begin with the world of axes, longships, and legendary beards. A world of gods, giants, and epic sagas written in blood and ice. We're diving into what life was really like for the women of the Viking Age. Forget the leather-clad shield maidens and warrior queens that television has sold you. While those figures might have existed, they were the exception, not the rule. For the average woman in Norse society, life was a brutal, unforgiving, and often thankless grind. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single winter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just been born in a smoky longhouse somewhere in 8th century Scandinavia. The good news: you're breathing. The bad news: you're a girl. And in the Viking world, that means your first few moments of life are a high-stakes audition. There's no welcome to the world party, no gentle cooing, just a tense silence as your father inspects you. Is she healthy? Is she strong? Does she have all her limbs? In a society where every mouth is another burden to feed, and every person must contribute to survival, a weak or sickly infant, especially a girl, is often a death sentence. Your father has the absolute right to decide your fate. He can choose to raise you, or he can choose to expose you. Yes, exposure. You'd be taken from the warmth of the hearth, carried out into the unforgiving wilderness, and left on a rock or in the forest to die from the cold, starvation, or the teeth of a wild animal. It sounds monstrous, but to the Vikings, it was a grim necessity, a way of ensuring the strength and survival of the clan. But let's say you pass the test. You're deemed worthy. Your father picks you up, sprinkles you with water, and gives you a name. Not a gentle, poetic name, but something strong, something that carries the weight of your ancestors. You are now officially part of the family, but don't get too comfortable. Your infancy is a gauntlet. The longhouse is drafty, filled with smoke, and home to more bacteria than a modern petri dish. Infant mortality is sky high. You might succumb to a cough, a fever, or a simple infection that modern medicine would laugh at. Your cradle is a wooden box filled with moss or animal furs, and your lullabies are the sounds of men sharpening axes and women chanting ancient spells to ward off evil spirits. You are swaddled tightly, not just for warmth, but to keep you from wriggling into the central fire pit. Every day you survive is a victory, a small miracle in a world that is not designed for the fragile. You are a Viking, yes, but you are not yet a survivor. That part comes next, and it will be earned through years of back-breaking work and quiet endurance. You've survived infancy, a feat in itself. You can now walk, talk, and most importantly, work. Welcome to childhood in the Viking Age, which is less about play and more about apprenticeship for a life of relentless labour. Forget dolls and games. Your toys are a miniature spindle, a needle carved from bone, and the endless, repetitive tasks that will define your existence. By the age of 5 or 6, your education begins. Not in reading or writing. Literacy is rare and mostly reserved for rune carvers and poets. But in the practical arts of survival. Your mother, your grandmother, your aunts. They are your teachers, and their lessons are harsh and unforgiving. You learn to card wool, a scratchy, greasy process that embeds lanolin deep under your fingernails. You learn to spin that wool into thread using a drop spindle, a mesmerizing, dizzying task that you practice for hours, your small fingers fumbling until the rhythm becomes second nature. This isn't a hobby. This is the very foundation of your world. Without thread, there are no clothes, no sails for the longships, no blankets to keep you from freezing to death in the winter. Your value is measured in the consistency of your yarn. While the boys are learning to fight with wooden swords and throw spears, you are mastering a different kind of warfare. The battle against hunger and cold. You learn to cook over an open fire, tending to bubbling pots of porridge and stew that smell of smoke and boiled roots. You learn to milk the goats and churn butter. You learn which wild herbs are medicine and which are poison. You learn to gut fish, salt meat, and bake flatbread on hot stones until your hands are calloused and strong. There is no concept of me time, no lazy afternoons spent dreaming. Your days are a blur of chores, each one essential to the functioning of the household. You fetch water from the well, mend torn clothes, sweep the dirt floor of the longhouse, and watch over your younger siblings. You are expected to be silent, obedient, and useful. A moment of idleness is a moment wasted, and waste is a luxury no one can afford. Through it all, you listen. You listen to the sagas chanted by the fire, stories of gods, heroes, and fierce shield maidens. You dream of being like them, perhaps, but you know your reality is the loom, the hearth, and the steady, unending rhythm of work. Your childhood is not a time of innocence. It's a dress rehearsal for the life of a Viking woman. A life that will demand everything from you and offer very little in return. Your home is not a house, it's a longhouse, a single cavernous room, often stretching 100 feet or more, built from timber, turf, and stone, and you share it with everyone, your immediate family, your extended family, a few farmhands, and possibly some newly acquired slaves from the last raid. All live, eat, sleep, and breathe under one long, smoke-stained roof. Privacy? What's that? The longhouse is the very definition of open-concept living, but without the charm of a modern loft apartment. The air is thick, a permanent cocktail of wood smoke from the central hearth, the sweat of unwashed bodies, the damp funk of wet wool, and the earthy aroma of the livestock that are often brought inside during the harsh winter months. Yes, you sleep a stone's throw away from a goat. The floor is packed earth, cold and hard, maybe strewn with rushes to soak up the spills and grime. Light is a precious commodity, filtering in weakly through the smoke hole in the roof or the open doorways at either end. At night, the only light comes from the flickering fire pit and a few sputtering tallow lamps, casting long, dancing shadows that make the carved posts look like looming gods or monsters. You sleep on a raised wooden platform that runs along the walls, huddled under animal furs for warmth. There are no partitions, no curtains, no separate bedrooms. You hear every cough, every snore, every whispered argument. Your life is a public performance, played out on a stage where the audience never leaves. The centre of this world is the hearth, a long, rectangular fire pit that runs down the middle of the longhouse. It is the source of heat, light, and food. Above it hangs a large iron cauldron, perpetually simmering with a stew or porridge known as grota. This is where the family gathers. where stories are told, where decisions are made. It is the heart of the home, but it is also a constant hazard, filling the air with soot that coats your lungs and stings your eyes. The furniture is sparse and functional. A few wooden chests for storage, a large loom where you and the other women spend countless hours weaving, and some rough-hewn benches. It's not a place of comfort. It's a place of survival. It's a workshop, a barracks, a barn, and a home, all rolled into one. You are never truly alone, surrounded by the constant noise, smells, and movements of a dozen other people. It's a life of forced intimacy, where secrets are impossible and solitude is a forgotten dream. This longhouse is your entire world, and it is both your sanctuary and your cage. You've mastered the art of survival within the longhouse, but what fuels that survival? Food. And in the Viking world, your diet is a testament to resilience, a bland, repetitive, and deeply practical affair. Forget the lavish, meat-heavy feasts you see in movies. For the average woman, every meal is a variation on a single, monotonous theme. Porridge. Welcome to the world of grata, a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever grains are available: barley, oats, rye. Boiled in water or milk until it forms a life-sustaining, soul-crushing paste. This is your breakfast, your lunch, and often your dinner. It's simmering in a pot over the hearth all day, and new ingredients are simply tossed on top of the old. You might get some boiled root vegetables thrown in: turnips, carrots, onions, if the harvest was good. On a truly exceptional day, maybe a handful of dried berries or a dollop of honey to break the monotony. But for the most part, it's just grey, gritty, and filling. Bread, or broad, is another staple, but it's not the light, airy loaf you're used to. This is a dense, heavy flatbread made from coarse barley or rye flour, often baked on a hot griddle or directly in the ashes of the fire. It's tough, chewy, and perfect for soaking up the last bits of stew, assuming you have any. What about protein? That depends entirely on where you live and what season it is. If you're near the coast, fish is a major part of your diet. Cod, herring, and salmon are caught, then smoked, dried, or salted to last through the long, dark winter. The smell of drying fish is the permanent perfume of your village. Meat is a luxury. While the men might hunt for deer, elk, or boar, that meat is reserved for special occasions or the chieftain's table. Your household's protein comes from the animals you raise: goats, sheep, and the occasional pig. But you don't slaughter them lightly. They are more valuable for their milk, wool, and labour. When an animal is killed, every single part of it is used. The blood is made into sausage, the organs are boiled in the stew, and the bones are cracked for their marrow. Nothing is wasted. You drink ale or mead, but mostly a weak, watery beer that's safer than the local stream. And you eat what you're given without complaint, because every spoonful is a victory against starvation. Viking cuisine isn't about flavour. It's about calories. It's the fuel that allows you to wake up the next day and do it all over again. In a world carved from mud, iron, and ice, how does a Viking woman maintain her appearance? The answer is a surprising blend of pragmatic hygiene and deep-seated cultural pride. While the idea of a clean Viking might seem like a contradiction, the archaeological record tells a different story. Vikings were, for their time, remarkably well-groomed. Excavations of Viking graves have unearthed a treasure trove of personal grooming tools: tweezers, ear scoops, and intricately carved combs, made from bone, antler, or ivory. The comb was not just a tool, it was a prized possession, often worn on a cord around the neck. A well-kept head of hair was a sign of status and self-respect. You would have spent a significant amount of time combing your long hair, braiding it into complex patterns, and possibly adorning it with colourful ribbons. But clean is a relative term. There was no soap as we know it. Bathing was a weekly ritual, usually on Saturdays, which was known as lagadaga, or washing day. This wasn't a private, relaxing soak in a tub. The whole family would wash in a nearby river, lake, or in a wooden tub filled with heated water back at the longhouse. They used a strong, lye-based soap for scrubbing clothes, but for their bodies, they relied on water, vigorous scrubbing with rough linen cloths, and perhaps some fragrant herbs. In the winter, bathing was a much rarer and more challenging affair. Some wealthier homesteads had their own bathhouses, small, sauna-like structures where water was thrown onto hot stones to create steam. This was as much a social event as a cleansing one, a chance to escape the smoky longhouse and warm your bones. As for cosmetics, you didn't have a makeup bag, but you weren't without your subtle enhancements. A substance called kohl, made from ground antimony or lead sulfide, was used to line the eyes. This wasn't just for beauty. The dark liner helped reduce glare from the sun and was believed to ward off evil spirits and eye infections. Your cheeks might be stained with the juice from berries to give them a healthy flush. And while your daily life was filled with grime, you took pride in what you could control. Your clothes, though simple, would be mended and kept as clean as possible. Your hair, your most prominent feature, would be your crown. In a world of brutal survival, these small acts of grooming were acts of defiance. They were a way of maintaining your dignity, of signalling to the world that even amidst the mud and the smoke, you were a person of value, not just a beast of burden. Your wardrobe is not a matter of fashion. It is a monument to your own labour. Every single thread of the clothes on your back was likely spun, dyed, and woven by you or the women of your household. The process is a year-round, all-consuming task that begins in the fields and ends at the loom. The primary material is wool. You help shear the sheep in the spring, a messy, strenuous job. Then comes the washing of the fleece, cleaning out the dirt, twigs, and lanolin. After that, you card the wool, combing the fibres with spiked paddles until they are aligned and fluffy, ready for spinning. This is where you spend countless hours of your life, with a drop spindle in hand, twisting the fibres into a strong, even thread. It's a skill that takes years to perfect, a meditative, repetitive motion that occupies your hands while you watch the children, stir the pot, or listen to sagas by the fire. The other main fabric is linen, made from the flax plant. This is even more labour-intensive. You help harvest the flax, then go through the arduous process of retting, rotting the woody stalk away, scutching, beating the fibres to separate them, and hackling, combing them into fine strands, before you can even begin to spin. Once you have your thread, it's time for colour. You gather plants, lichens, and minerals to create dyes. Weld for yellow, woad for blue, madder for red. You boil the threads in large vats over the fire, a stinky, alchemical process that turns your plain yarn into a vibrant palette. Finally, you take your coloured threads to the loom. Most longhouses have a large, vertical, warp-weighted loom, a formidable piece of equipment. Weaving is slow, meticulous work. requiring immense patience and physical strength. You stand for hours, passing the shuttle back and forth, beating the weft into place with a wooden sword, creating the very fabric that will clothe your family. Your typical outfit is a simple linen underdress, or serk, worn next to the skin. Over that, you wear a woolen overdress, often called a smoker, or kiyol, which is like a tube of fabric held up by two straps pinned at the shoulders with ornate oval brooches. These brooches are not just functional. They are your primary form of jewelry, often intricately decorated and sometimes connected by a string of beads. A belt cinches your waist, from which you hang your most important tools: a knife, a small pouch, and the keys to the food chests, symbolizing your authority as the lady of the house. In the cold, you add a cloak or a shawl, also woven by your own hands. Every piece of clothing is a testament to your skill and endurance. It is warmth, protection, and identity, all woven from the sweat of your labor. You are now a young woman, perhaps 15 or 16 years old. You are strong, capable, and have mastered the domestic arts. Your father decides it is time for you to marry. Your opinion on the matter is not requested. This is not a union of love. It is a strategic alliance, a business transaction designed to strengthen the family's wealth, power, and social standing. You are the primary asset in this negotiation. Your value is determined by your family's status, your health, and your proven ability to work. A potential suitor, or more likely his father, will approach your father to begin the negotiations. They will haggle over the terms like their trade in livestock. The two key financial components are the dowry and the bride price. The dowry, or hymenphilgia, is the wealth you bring into the marriage from your family: land, animals, jewelry, household goods. This technically remains your property, a crucial safety net in a dangerous world. The bride price, or munda, is the amount the groom's family pays to your family to secure the match. It is compensation for the loss of a valuable working member of the household. The discussions are formal and legally binding, witnessed by both families. Once an agreement is reached, you are officially betrothed. You might meet your future husband for the first time at this ceremony. He is likely a decade or more older than you, a man chosen not for his kindness or compatibility, but for his farm, his reputation as a warrior, or his family's political connections. Your feelings are irrelevant. Your duty is to accept the match, to honor your family, and to prepare for your new life as the mistress of another man's household. There is a palpable sense of anxiety and finality. You will be leaving the only home you have ever known, moving to a new village, a new longhouse, to live among strangers who will now be your family. You are a pawn in a game of dynastic chess, your future decided by men in a smoke-filled room. The sagas are full of stories of women who resist their arranged marriages, but these are tales of tragedy and bloodshed. For most, there is no choice. You are a daughter of the Vikings, and your fate is to be woven into the tapestry of your clan, whether you like the pattern or not. The day of your wedding is not a fairy tale. The negotiations are complete, the price has been paid, and the day of your wedding has arrived. This is not a quiet, intimate ceremony. It is a massive, multi-day feast, a public spectacle designed to display the wealth and status of both families. The rituals are steeped in ancient tradition, each one meant to ensure fertility, prosperity, and the favor of the gods. Preparations begin days in advance. A special ceremonial ale is brewed, and animals are slaughtered for the feast. You undergo a ritual purification, a symbolic washing away of your maidenhood. Your hair, which has been worn long and loose, is now braided and coiled, a sign of your new status as a married woman. You are dressed in your finest clothes, a new woolen dress and a bridal crown, perhaps of flowers or metal. The wedding ceremony itself is not held in a temple. It takes place at the feast, in front of all the assembled guests. Your father formally hands you over to your groom, placing your hand in his. Oaths are sworn over a sacred ring, which is passed around and held by both families as they pledge their alliance. A sacrifice is made, usually an animal, and its blood is sprinkled on the altar and the couple to bless the union. The gods are invoked, especially Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, and Thor, the protector of marriages. Then the feasting begins. It is a loud, boisterous affair. The hall is packed with relatives, allies, and neighbours, all drinking heavily from horns of ale and mead. Skalds, the Viking poets, recite long, epic poems praising the bravery of the groom and the beauty of the bride. There are games, toasts, and probably a few drunken brawls. Throughout it all, you sit beside your husband, a near stranger, expected to be a serene and gracious hostess, while your future is being celebrated by a room full of roaring men. One of the most important moments comes when the groom presents you with his ancestral sword. By accepting it, you are formally accepting your role in his family, entrusting the protection of his lineage to you and your future sons. Later, you are led to the bridal bed, a moment witnessed by several members of the family to ensure the marriage is consummated and legally valid. The next morning you receive the morgengifu, or morning gift, from your husband. This is a personal gift of property or wealth, and it is yours to keep, a final confirmation of your new status. You are now a wife, a husfreyja, the mistress of a new household. The party may continue for several more days, but for you, the work has already begun. You must now navigate a new family, a new home, and a new life, all while carrying the immense pressure to produce an heir and prove that your father's bargain was a wise one. It's easy to assume that as a woman in the brutal, male-dominated Viking world, you were little more than property. And while your marriage was a transaction and your life was one of hard labor, the reality of your legal standing is surprisingly complex. Norse law, as recorded in later medieval texts like the Icelandic Gragas, granted you rights and protections that were unheard of for women in many other parts of contemporary Europe. First and foremost, you were not your husband's possession. You had a legal identity. The property you brought into the marriage as a dowry remained yours. Your husband could manage it, but he could not sell it without your consent. If he died, or if you divorced, that property returned to you, providing a crucial measure of financial independence and security. This wasn't just a formality, it was your safety net, but your most significant power came from your role as the husfreyja, the lady of the house. When your husband was away, which was often, thanks to the Viking penchant for raiding, trading, and exploring, you were in complete command of the farmstead. You managed the household, directed the servants and slaves, controlled the finances, and made all the daily decisions necessary for survival. The symbol of this authority was the set of keys you wore at your belt. These were the keys to the food chests and storage rooms, No one, not even your husband, could access them without your permission. You were the keeper of the family's wealth and sustenance, a position of immense trust and responsibility. You also had the right to divorce. If your husband was abusive, failed to provide for the family, or was shamed in some way, you could legally dissolve the marriage. The process was public. You had to declare your intention to divorce in front of witnesses, first at your bedside, then at the threshold of the longhouse, and finally before a public assembly. If the divorce was granted, you took your dowry and your mourning gift and were free to return to your family or remarry. And if your husband was killed, you didn't simply become a ward of his male relatives. As a widow, you could inherit property and take over as the head of the household, especially if your sons were not yet of age. Women like Horde, the deep-minded, a powerful matriarch in the Icelandic sagas, commanded ships, led expeditions, and founded entire settlements. While these women were exceptional, they operated within a legal framework that recognized female agency. So, while your life was circumscribed by tradition and duty, you were not powerless. You were the backbone of Norse society, the anchor of the home, and the silent, steely manager of the Viking world. You are now mistress of your own longhouse, a title that sounds grand, but in reality means you are the manager, accountant, doctor, chef, and chief laborer of a small, self-sufficient kingdom. Your husband may be the public face of the family, but you are its beating heart, and your work never, ever ends. Your day begins before the sun rises. You are the first to wake, stirring the embers of the hearth back to life. The longhouse is cold and dark, and it is your job to bring it warmth and light. You oversee the morning meal, a simple porridge, but one that needs to feed your entire household. Your husband, your children, any elderly relatives, farmhands, and slaves. After the meal, your husband and the other men might head out to the fields, to the forge, or to the sea. You remain. Your domain is the infields, the area immediately surrounding the longhouse and everything within its walls. Your primary task is textile production. You spend hours at the loom, the rhythmic clatter of the weaving sword a constant soundtrack to your day. But you are not just weaving, you are also supervising. You direct the female slaves and your own daughters in spinning, dyeing, and mending. The family's survival through the winter depends on the cloth you produce. You are also the keeper of the food. You manage the dairy, making cheese, butter, and skyer, a thick sour yogurt. You tend the kitchen garden, growing herbs, cabbage, and beans. You oversee the preservation of food, salting fish, smoking meat, drying fruits, stockpiling everything in the locked chests, to which only you hold the keys. You are the family doctor. When a child has a fever, you are the one who brews herbal remedies. When a farmhand cuts his hand, you are the one who cleans the wound and stitches it with a bone needle and fine linen thread. You know which plants heal and which harm, a knowledge passed down through generations of women. You are the financial manager. You keep track of the household's wealth, barter and surplus wool or cheese for goods you cannot produce yourself, like salt or iron. You ensure there is enough seed for the next planting, enough fodder for the animals, enough food to last until the spring thaw. Your life is a constant, exhausting calculation of resources and risks. There are no days off, no holidays from your responsibilities. Even during the great seasonal feasts, you are the one orchestrating the cooking, the serving, the cleaning. You are the last to go to bed, long after the embers have died down, your mind still turning over the tasks of the next day. Your husband may bring home silver from a raid, but it is your labour, your foresight, and your unwavering strength that turns that silver into a thriving, functioning home. Of all the trials a Viking woman faces, none is more dangerous than childbirth. In a world without modern medicine, bringing a new life into the world is a life or death gamble, a battle fought not with swords and shields, but with grit, prayer, and sheer biological will. When your time comes, you do not go to a hospital. You retreat to a small private space, perhaps a separate hut or a screened-off corner of the longhouse, away from the prying eyes of the men. This is a woman's affair. You are attended by your mother, your sisters, and other experienced women of the community who act as midwives. They bring with them a collection of folk wisdom and sacred rituals. The room is likely dimly lit, filled with the smoke of burning herbs meant to purify the space and appease the gods. The midwives will chant incantations or galder, calling upon the goddesses Freya and Frigg to grant an easy birth. They may give you a leek to hold, a symbol of fertility and growth, or tie knots in a piece of cloth, which are then untied to symbolically release the baby. There is no anesthesia, no epidural. You endure the pain, raw and unmedicated. The midwives might offer you a strong ale or an herbal brew to dull the agony, but mostly you rely on your own strength. You give birth in a squatting or kneeling position, holding onto a rope or a wooden post for support, letting gravity aid the process. Complications are frequent and often fatal. A baby in the breech position, excessive bleeding, a prolonged labour. Any of these could mean death for you, the child, or both. The midwives do what they can, using their hands to try and turn the baby or applying pressure to stop the bleeding, but their knowledge is limited. If the baby is born healthy, it is washed and swaddled. But the danger is not over. Postpartum infections are common in the unhygienic conditions of the longhouse, and many women who survive childbirth succumb to fever in the days that follow. And then there is the ritual of acceptance. The newborn is placed on the floor before your husband. If he picks the child up, it is formally accepted into the family. If he does not, if the child is sickly, deformed, or simply an unwanted mouth to feed, it will be taken out and exposed, left to the elements. For a mother who has just endured the crucible of birth, this moment is one of unimaginable tension. You have fought for this life, and now its fate rests in the hands of another. To survive childbirth in the Viking Age is to be a warrior in the truest sense. Your battlefield is the birthing bed. Your victory is a living child, and your scars are a testament to the brutal, beautiful, and terrifying power of creation. You have survived childbirth, and your husband has accepted the newborn into the clan. Now begins the relentless, all-consuming task of raising a Viking child in a world that is actively trying to kill them. This is not a journey of gentle parenting and developmental milestones. It is a crash course in survival, and you are the lead instructor. The first few years are the most perilous. You nurse your baby yourself, as breast milk is the safest and most reliable food source. But the threats are endless. A simple cold can turn into a fatal respiratory infection. A bout of diarrhea can lead to deadly dehydration. The unhygienic longhouse is a breeding ground for disease, and you're constantly vigilant, using herbal remedies and protective charms to ward off sickness and evil spirits. You carry your baby with you everywhere, strapped to your back in a sling as you go about your chores. There are no playpens, no babysitters. The child is a constant presence, learning the rhythms of your life from the moment they are born. As soon as your children can walk, they are expected to contribute. There is no concept of a carefree childhood. A daughter by the age of 5 is already learning to spin wool, her small fingers mimicking your own. A son is helping his father mend nets or feed the livestock. Their play often mimics adult work. Boys play, fight with wooden swords. Girls practice weaving on miniature looms. You teach them the skills they will need to survive. You teach your daughter how to manage a household, how to identify edible plants, how to cook, clean, and care for others. You teach your son to be strong, to endure pain without complaint, and to respect the gods. But your most important lessons are taught through stories. By the fire at night, you tell them the sagas of their ancestors, the myths of the gods, the history of their clan. You instill in them a sense of identity, of belonging, of the immense weight of the family's honor that they now carry. Discipline is strict and physical. A disobedient or lazy child is a liability to the entire household. You love your children fiercely, but you cannot afford to be sentimental. You are preparing them for a world that is harsh and unforgiving. Every skill you teach them, every story you tell them, is a piece of armor for the battles you know they will face. You watch them grow, praying they will survive to adulthood, knowing that many of their playmates will not. To be a Viking mother is to be a teacher, a doctor, a protector, and a historian, all while spinning wool with one hand and stirring a pot with the other. It is a role of immense importance, and one that is entirely invisible. The longships have sailed. Your husband, your sons, your brothers. They have gone a Viking, seeking wealth and glory across the sea. They may be gone for months, even years. And you are left behind. But do not mistake this for a time of rest. This is when your power and your burden is at its greatest. With the men away, the farmstead becomes a world run by women. You are now the undisputed head of the household, responsible not only for its daily management, but for its very survival and defense. The keys at your belt jingle with a new weight of authority. You direct the spring planting, deciding which fields to sow with barley and which to leave fallow. You oversee the harvest, organizing the labor of the remaining old men, young boys, and slaves. You manage the livestock, trade surplus goods, and hold the entire economy of your small kingdom in your hands. This is not just domestic work. It is statecraft on a micro level. The survival of your family and the success of the entire Viking enterprise rests on your shoulders. If the harvest fails, if the food stores are mismanaged, there will be nothing for the raiders to return to. But your responsibilities extend beyond the farm. You are now the guardian of your family's honor and its safety. The Viking world is rife with feuds and opportunistic rivals. A farmstead with its warriors away is a tempting target. You must be vigilant. You learn to read the landscape, to spot the signs of trouble. You may not wield a sword in battle, but you know how to secure the longhouse, how to rally the community, and how to defend your home with whatever is at hand. An axe, a hunting spear, or a pot of boiling water. The sagas tell tales of women who took up arms to defend their lands. And while this may have been rare, the spirit of fierce self-reliance was not. You also live with a constant, gnawing uncertainty. Will your husband return? Will he come back rich with silver and fame? Or will his ship be lost in a storm, his body left on a foreign shore? You consult seeresses, you make offerings to the gods, you search the horizon day after day for the sight of a familiar sail. When the ships finally do return, there is a mix of celebration and sorrow. Some women become wealthy widows overnight. Others welcome home men who are scarred, changed, or haunted by what they have done. You must then reintegrate these warriors back into a world you have painstakingly maintained in their absence. This is a delicate dance of power, a shifting of roles that is rarely seamless. To be a woman left behind is to be a queen in all but name. You are the steward, the defender, and the silent, uncelebrated architect of the Viking age. In a world governed by the whims of weather, war, and unpredictable gods, a Viking woman's life is steeped in a potent blend of folk magic, ritual, and a deep reverence for the unseen. While the men may pray to Odin for victory in battle, or Thor for strength, it is often the women who are the keepers of the more intimate, domestic, and mystical side of Norse religion. Your faith is not confined to grand temples. It is practiced at the hearth, in the fields, and at the sacred groves and stones that dot the landscape. You know the small daily rituals that keep the household safe. You leave out a bowl of milk for the landvettir, the spirits of the land, to ensure their good favour and a bountiful harvest. You carve protective runes onto the posts of the longhouse, or onto small amulets worn by your children. You know the chants, the galda, that can soothe a fever, ease childbirth, or protect the livestock from disease. This is not witchcraft in the sinister sense. It is a practical, necessary part of survival, a way of negotiating with the powerful forces that shape your world. The most revered and feared figure in this spiritual landscape is the vulva, the seeress. These are powerful women, often old and travelling from farmstead to farmstead, who can see into the future, communicate with spirits, and perform complex rituals of divination known as sedur. When a vulva arrives at your longhouse, it is a momentous occasion. She is treated with the utmost respect, given the seat of honour, and fed the finest food. The community gathers as she enters a trance, chanting and drumming, her soul travelling to other realms to seek knowledge. She might predict the outcome of a harvest, the fate of a raiding party, or the cause of a mysterious illness. Her prophecies are taken with deadly seriousness, and her power is immense, often rivaling that of the local chieftain. While you may not be a vulva yourself, you understand and respect her power. You might practice simpler forms of divination, like casting runes or interpreting dreams. You believe in the power of fate, or weird, a concept that suggests everyone's destiny is already woven by the Norns, the three goddesses of fate. But while fate is powerful, it is not entirely rigid. Your actions, your courage, and your rituals can influence the threads. Your spiritual life is a constant conversation with the world around you, a world that is alive, sentient, and filled with beings both benevolent and malevolent. To be a Viking woman is to walk in two worlds at once, the solid, practical world of the Longhouse and the shimmering, unseen world of spirits, gods, and magic. You fall ill. A deep, racking cough settles in your chest, or a fever leaves you weak and shivering. In the Viking age, there is no doctor to call, no pharmacy to visit. Your healthcare is a desperate, homespun mixture of herbal wisdom, magical ritual, and a large dose of fatalism. Your first line of defense is the knowledge passed down through generations of women. You are the family's primary healer. You know the properties of the local plants. You brew a tea from yarrow to reduce a fever, or make a poultice from comfrey to help heal a broken bone. You know that angelica can soothe a stomachache, and that the mold from certain foods, when applied to a wound, can sometimes stop an infection. A primitive form of penicillin, discovered through centuries of trial and error. But medicine is never just about the physical. Illness is often seen as an intrusion of malevolent forces, a curse from an enemy, or the displeasure of the gods. So, your healing practices are deeply intertwined with magic. You might chant a healing galder over the sick person, a rhythmic incantation designed to drive out the sickness. You might carve a specific rune, like uruz for strength and healing, onto a piece of wood and place it under their bed. Or you might perform a small ritual, passing a sick child through a symbolic hoop of twisted branches to trick the illness into leaving. Surgery is almost non-existent, except in the most dire of circumstances. A warrior's wound might be stitched with a bone needle and animal sinew, but there is no concept of sterilization. Infection is a constant, deadly threat. A simple cut from a farming tool or a rusty nail could easily become a death sentence. Dental health is surprisingly decent thanks to a coarse, low-sugar diet. But if a tooth does become infected, the only solution is to pull it out with a pair of pliers from the blacksmith's forge without any anesthetic. Broken bones are set as best as possible and splintered with wood and cloth, but they often heal poorly, leaving the person with a permanent limp or chronic pain. Ultimately, survival often comes down to the strength of one's own constitution and a good deal of luck. You do what you can with the knowledge you have, but you also accept the power of fate. If someone is meant to die, they will die. You can fight, you can pray, you can brew every tea in your arsenal, but in the end, the Norns have the final say. To be a Viking woman is to be a healer, who walks a fine line between life and death, armed with little more than plants, prayers, and the courage to face the inevitable. The Viking world is not an egalitarian society. It is a rigid hierarchy built on wealth, lineage, and most starkly, freedom. At the very bottom of this pyramid are the thralls, or slaves, and the reality of their existence is a dark undercurrent that runs beneath every saga and every hoard of silver. Slaves are not a rarity. They are a cornerstone of the Viking economy. They are the human loot from raids captured in Ireland, England, and the Slavic lands. They are the engine that powers the farmstead, the labour that allows their masters the freedom to trade and fight. And as a Viking woman, your relationship with slavery is deeply complicated. You are both a potential victim and a potential owner. If your village is raided, you could be captured, bound, and sold in a distant slave market, your life reduced to a piece of property. Your fate would be one of unending labour, abuse, and the constant threat of violence. Female slaves, known as ambatir, are particularly vulnerable, often forced into sexual servitude by their masters. But if you are the mistress of a prosperous household, you are also a slave owner. You direct the thralls in their daily chores, grinding grain, weaving cloth, tending the livestock. They sleep on the floor of the longhouse, eat the scraps from your table, and have no legal rights. They can be beaten, sold, or killed with impunity. The sagas are filled with casual mentions of masters killing their slaves for minor infractions. While your own life is one of hard work, theirs is one of utter subjugation. They are the invisible hands that make your life possible. Their labor frees you up to manage the more complex aspects of the household. Their presence reinforces your own status as a free woman. It is a brutal, uncomfortable truth. Your freedom is built upon their bondage. This duality creates a complex social dynamic within the longhouse. You're in a position of authority over the thralls, but you also work alongside them, sharing the same space, breathing the same smoky air. There might be moments of shared humanity, a quiet understanding between women, but the chasm of status is always there, unbridgeable and absolute. The line between a free woman and a thrall can be terrifyingly thin. One bad raid, one lost battle, and the roles could be reversed. This constant, underlying precarity shapes the worldview of everyone in Norse society. It is a reminder that freedom is not a right. It is a privilege, one that is fiercely guarded and often brutally enforced. To be a Viking woman is to live within this system, a system that both elevates you and threatens you, a system built on the stolen lives of others. The world of the Vikings is often romanticized as a place of heroic battles and epic adventures. But for a woman on the home front, it is more often a world of simmering tension and sudden, brutal violence. Conflict is not a distant event. It is a constant, personal threat that can erupt at any moment within your community or even within your own longhouse. Let's start with the blood feud. In a society without a centralized police force, justice is a private matter. If a member of your family is killed or insulted, it is your family's duty to seek revenge. This can trigger a cycle of retaliatory violence that can last for generations, a concept known as a blood feud. As a woman, you are often at the heart of these feuds, though not usually as a combatant. You are the keeper of the family's honor, the one who remembers the slights and urges the men to action. In the sagas, women are often portrayed as the inciters, goading their husbands and sons to avenge a death, sometimes by shaming them, presenting them with bloody clothes, or reminding them of their cowardice. You are the emotional engine of the feud, and your words can be as deadly as any sword. But you are also a potential target. In a feud, everyone in the family is at risk. Your home could be attacked, your livestock stolen, your children threatened. You live with a constant sense of unease, knowing that an old grudge could flare up at any time. Domestic violence is also a grim reality. While Norse law offers women the right to divorce an abusive husband, the process is public and difficult. A man has the right to strike his wife, and society often turns a blind eye unless the abuse is extreme. Your protection comes not from the law, but from the strength of your own family. If your father and brothers are powerful, your husband is less likely to mistreat you. If you are far from home with no strong male relatives to defend you, you are vulnerable. And then there is the violence of the raid. While you may be safe while your husband is away, his return can bring the brutality of the battlefield back into the longhouse. The men who come back are not always the same men who left. They are hardened, often traumatized, and accustomed to solving problems with an axe. The sagas are filled with stories of violence spilling over into the domestic sphere, of warriors unable to leave the battlefield behind. To be a Viking woman is to be a master of navigating these currents of violence. You must be a diplomat, a strategist, and a guardian, all while knowing that a single wrong word or a lingering look could ignite a conflict that consumes everything you love. You have survived childbirth, feuds, and the endless grind of the seasons. You have managed your household, raised your children, and seen your husband off to war and back, perhaps multiple times. Now, your hair is streaked with silver, your hands are gnarled from a lifetime of labour, and your face is a map of every winter you have endured. You are an old woman. In the Viking age, this is not a failure. It is a monumental achievement. To reach old age is to have outlasted disease, famine, war, and childbirth. It is to be a survivor in the truest sense of the word. And with that survival comes a unique form of power and respect. You are no longer valued for your ability to bear children or perform hard labour. You are valued for your wisdom. You are the living repository of your family's history, the keeper of the sagas, the genealogies, and the ancient traditions. You are the one who knows the old stories, the old spells, the old ways. Younger women come to you for advice on childbirth, on healing, on managing a difficult husband. Men may come to you for your knowledge of the past, for your insight into long-forgotten land disputes or family alliances. Your voice, once quieted by youth and duty, now carries the weight of experience. You may become the matriarch of the family, a formidable figure whose opinion is sought and whose disapproval is feared. You oversee the marriages of your grandchildren, your strategic mind still sharp. You hold a position of honour at the hearth, your stories captivating a new generation. However, this respect is conditional. It depends on your ability to remain useful. If you become frail, senile, or a significant burden on the household with no one to care for you, your final years can be grim. The sagas contain grim tales of the elderly being put on a family cliff during times of famine, a form of euthanasia to preserve resources for the young. But if you maintain your health and your wits, you can become one of the most powerful figures in the community. You might even transition into the role of a Volva, a seeress, your age and closeness to the ancestors, giving your prophecies a potent authority. Old age for a Viking woman is a paradox. It is a time of physical decline, but potential social and spiritual ascent. You have shed the burdens of youth and now wield a different kind of power, the power of memory, of knowledge, and of having looked death in the face 1,000 times and survived. The end has come. Whether in the quiet of old age or the sudden violence of a raid, your life in the Viking world is over. But for the Norse, death is not an ending. It is a journey, a transition to another realm. And your funeral is the final, crucial ritual to ensure you reach your destination safely. Your burial reflects your status in life. If you were a woman of great importance, a wealthy landowner, a respected matriarch, or a powerful seeress, your funeral is an elaborate affair. Your body is washed, dressed in your finest clothes, and laid out in the longhouse for friends and family to pay their respects. You are not buried alone. You are sent into the afterlife with the things you will need, a practice known as providing grave goods. Your most prized possessions are placed with you. Your keys, symbolizing your domestic authority, your spindle and loom weights, representing your skill in textile arts, your favorite brooches and beads, and perhaps a sickle or other tools of the farm. If you were particularly powerful, you might be buried in a ship. The vessel is dragged ashore and placed in a large pit. You are laid within it. surrounded by your wealth, and sometimes, tragically, by sacrificed animals and even human slaves, intended to serve you in the next world. A great mound of earth and stone is then raised over the ship, a permanent landmark honouring your memory. Most women, however, receive a simpler burial. You are placed in a grave dug in the family plot, oriented north-south, with your personal items beside you. The grave might be lined with stones, or covered with a small mound. The important thing is the ritual itself, the public acknowledgement of your passing, and the community's role in sending you off properly. But where are you going? The afterlife is not a simple heaven or hell. For warriors who die bravely in battle, the destination is Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where they will feast and fight until the final battle of Ragnarok. But as a woman, Valhalla is not your destination. Your soul is believed to travel to one of several other realms. You might go to Folkvanga, the beautiful field ruled by the goddess Freya, who receives half of the slain warriors and perhaps other worthy souls. Or, more likely, you will journey to Hell, a realm ruled by the goddess of the same name. Despite its name, Hell is not a place of fire and torment like the Christian hell. It is a shadowy, misty realm, a quiet continuation of life for those who die of sickness or old age. It is a neutral, if somewhat gloomy place. To get there, your spirit must cross a roaring river and pass through a great gate, and your grave goods are meant to aid you on this journey. To be a Viking woman is to live a life of labour, and to face a death steeped in ritual, your final legacy not written in stone, but woven into the fabric of the land and the memory of your clan. The image is iconic. A fierce, beautiful woman, clad in armour, shield in one hand, sword in the other, fighting shoulder to shoulder with the men. This is the Shield Maiden, the figure who has come to dominate our modern perception of Viking women. But did she really exist? The answer is complex, a tangled web of myth, archaeology, and historical debate. Let's start with the primary sources, the sagas. Norse literature is filled with tales of formidable female warriors. There is Hervor from the Hervarar saga, who retrieves a cursed sword from her father's burial mound and leads a pirate fleet. There is Brynhilda, the Valkyrie in the Völsunga saga, who is punished by Odin for her battlefield choices. And of course, there is Lagertha, made famous by modern television, who is described in the 12th century writings of Saxo Grammaticus as a skilled warrior who fought alongside the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. These stories are compelling, but they are not history. The sagas were written down centuries after the Viking Age, often by Christian scribes who were looking back on a heroic, pagan past. They are literature, filled with hyperbole, mythological elements, and archetypes. The Shield Maiden may have been a literary trope, a symbol of a woman who transgressed gender norms rather than a common reality. For a long time, that's what most historians believed. Then came the archaeology. For decades, Viking warrior graves containing swords, shields, and axes were automatically identified as male. But with the advent of DNA analysis, that assumption has been shattered. The most famous case is the Birka warrior grave, a 10th century burial in Sweden. It was long considered the archetypal male warrior grave, complete with a full set of weapons, armour-piercing arrows, and 2 horses. In 2017, osteological and DNA analysis confirmed the skeleton was biologically female. The revelation sent shockwaves through the historical community. Here was physical evidence, it seemed, of a high-ranking female warrior. Other, less spectacular graves of women buried with weapons have also been identified. So, what does this all mean? It does not mean that armies of shield maidens were a common sight on Viking battlefields. The vast majority of women lived the domestic, labor-intensive lives we have discussed. A woman fighting in a shield wall would have been an anomaly, a rare and remarkable exception. But it does suggest that it was not impossible. In a society where survival was paramount, it is conceivable that some women, perhaps those who were unmarried, widowed, or simply possessed the skill and will, did take up arms to defend their homes, or even join a raid. The shield maiden was likely not a formal role or a common career path. She was an outlier, a woman who, through extraordinary circumstances or personal prowess, broke the mold. She was the exception that proves the rule, a figure so rare and so awe-inspiring that her story was told and retold until she became a legend. She may not have been the norm, but the evidence suggests she was not just a myth either. While the Shield Maiden may have been a rare and legendary figure, the powerful female ruler was a documented, if still exceptional, reality. In a world where power was often measured by the swing of an axe, some Viking women wielded influence not through battle, but through wealth, lineage, and sheer force of will. These were the queens, the matriarchs, and the adventurers who commanded respect, led expeditions, and shaped the course of the Viking Age. One of the most remarkable of these figures was Horde the Deep-Minded. Featured prominently in the Icelandic sagas, Horde was the daughter of a Norwegian chieftain and the widow of the Viking king of Dublin. After the death of her husband and son, she found herself in a precarious position in Scotland. Instead of accepting a new marriage or fading into obscurity, Horde did something audacious. She commissioned a ship to be built in secret, gathered her grandchildren and a loyal retinue of followers, and set sail for the newly discovered land of Iceland. She was not a passenger. She was the captain. She commanded the expedition, navigating the treacherous North Atlantic, and successfully landed on the Icelandic coast. There, she claimed a vast swathe of land, establishing a prosperous settlement. She granted land to her followers, both free men and the slaves she had freed, and ruled as the respected matriarch of her domain until her death. Aud was not a warrior, but her story is one of profound courage, leadership, and autonomy. Another formidable woman was Freydis Eiriksdottir, the daughter of the infamous Eric the Red and sister of Leif Erikson. Her tale, recorded in the Greenland Saga, paints a picture of a woman who was ambitious, ruthless, and utterly fearless. On an expedition to Vinland, North America, she tricked her partners in a business venture, had their men killed, and then, when her own men hesitated to kill the women, she allegedly took up an axe and murdered the 5 women herself. While her actions are portrayed as villainous, they also highlight a woman who was not afraid to wield power and violence to achieve her goals. There were also the unnamed queens and noblewomen who acted as regents for their young sons, managed vast estates, and forged political alliances through marriage. Their power was often indirect, exercised from within the longhouse rather than on the battlefield, but it was no less real. These women were the exception, their lives a stark contrast to the toil and anonymity of the average farm wife. But they demonstrate that the Viking world, for all its rigid gender roles, had cracks through which determined and powerful women could rise. They prove that leadership was not an exclusively male domain, and that a woman with enough wealth, wit, and will could command ships, found settlements, and carve her own saga into the annals of history. The story of the Viking Age is a story of expansion. It is a tale of longships pushing into uncharted waters, of brave and desperate people leaving their homeland in search of new lands to farm, trade, and settle. And in this great migration, women were not just passive baggage, they were essential pioneers, the silent, unsung co-founders of new worlds. When we think of Viking colonization, we often picture boatloads of bearded warriors landing on a foreign shore. But archaeological evidence from settlements in Iceland, Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and even the short-lived colony in Vinland, North America, tells a different story. These were not military outposts, they were family migrations. The graves and settlement remains show a balanced population of men, women, and children. The Vikings were not just raiding, they were relocating, and you can't build a new society without women. The journey itself was a brutal test of endurance. A woman would have been crammed onto a crowded nar, an open-decked cargo ship, for weeks on end. She would face violent storms, bone-chilling cold, and the constant threat of sickness, all while likely caring for young children. There was no shelter from the elements, no comfort, just the heaving deck and the endless grey sea. Her role on this voyage was critical. She would have been responsible for managing the preserved food stores, tending to the sick, and mending the sails and clothes that were being relentlessly battered by wind and salt water. Upon arrival in a new land like Iceland, a place of volcanic rock and stark, treeless landscapes, the real work began. The men might have claimed the land, but it was the women who turned a patch of windswept earth into a home. They were the ones who established the first households, who adapted their farming and textile producing skills to a new and often harsher environment. They were the ones who gave birth to the first generation of Icelanders or Greenlanders, the children who would carry the culture and language of the old world into the new. The presence of typically female grave goods, spindles, loom weights, brooches, and keys in these colonial cemeteries is a testament to their fundamental role. These were not just trinkets, they were the tools of civilization. The spindle whorl was as important to the success of a settlement as the sword. Without the ability to produce cloth, to manage food, and to raise healthy children, these fledgling colonies would have collapsed within a single winter. The women of the Viking diaspora were the anchors of their communities. They were the farmers, the innovators, and the culture bearers who transformed raw wilderness into Norse society. They may not have been the ones wielding the axes that cleared the land, but they were the ones who planted the seeds, both literal and metaphorical, that allowed a new world to grow. While the men were forging iron into swords and axes, Viking women were engaged in a different, more subtle, but equally profound form of creation. In the smoky dimness of the longhouse, they were the master artisans, the creators of intricate beauty, the artists whose medium was not stone or metal, but fibre, wood, and bone. Their primary art form was textile production. This was not a mere craft. It was a highly respected skill that required immense technical knowledge and artistic vision. The sagas praise women for their weaving abilities, and a beautifully crafted cloak or wall hanging was as valuable as a well-made sword. Using the warp-weighted loom, they created complex patterns, chevrons, diamonds, and intricate geometric designs. They were masters of color, using their knowledge of plant-based dyes to create vibrant fabrics that brought warmth and life to the stark interiors of the longhouse. The most famous examples of their skill are the tapestries found in the Oseberg ship burial, a 9th century grave of a powerful woman. These fragments, though faded, depict scenes of processions, rituals, and mythological figures, a narrative art form of incredible complexity and sophistication. This was not just decoration, it was storytelling in thread. But their artistry was not confined to the loom. They were also skilled in embroidery, using coloured threads to adorn clothes with elaborate designs. They practiced tablet weaving, a technique used to create strong, decorative bands for belts and trim. They were also likely the ones who carved the intricate designs on many of the household items we find in archaeological digs: spoons, boxes, and the all-important combs. While a man might carve a runestone, a woman would carve the delicate patterns on the tools of her daily life. Their artistry was woven into the fabric of the everyday. It was functional, yes, but it was also a powerful form of cultural expression. A woman could express her status, her identity, and her connection to her heritage through the patterns she wove and the colours she chose. In a world where women's voices were often not recorded in writing, their art became their voice. It was a silent language of skill, patience, and creativity. While the sagas tell us the stories of the men, it is the surviving textiles and carved objects that tell us the story of the women. They are a testament to the fact that even in a world defined by brutal survival, the human need to create beauty endures. And in the Viking Age, it was often the women who were its most dedicated and talented creators. In a society without widespread literacy, memory was currency. And in the Viking world, it was often the women who were the keepers of this currency, the guardians of the oral traditions that held the culture together. While men like Snorri Sturluson would later write down the sagas and the Eddas, for centuries these stories existed only in the spoken word, passed down from one generation to the next around the hearth fire. As a woman, you were a living library. You were expected to know the genealogies of your family, tracing your lineage back through generations of heroes and chieftains. This was not just a matter of pride. It was a matter of legal and social importance. Knowing your ancestry could determine your right to inherit land, your eligibility for a particular marriage, or your standing in a legal dispute. You were the one who taught these lineages to your children, ensuring that the family's history was not forgotten. You were also a primary vessel for the myths and legends of your people. While the skalds, the professional male poets, might perform long, formal poems at a chieftain's feast, it was the women who told the more intimate stories at home. You would tell your children the tales of Thor's hammer, of Odin's quest for wisdom, of Loki's tricks and betrayals. You would sing them the lullabies and the folk songs that contain the seeds of these great myths. Through these stories, you taught them the values of your culture: courage, honor, loyalty, and a healthy respect for the capricious and often dangerous gods. Furthermore, women's voices, though rarely the focus, are embedded within the poetry itself. The Eddic poems, our main source for Norse mythology, are filled with powerful female figures, goddesses, seeresses, and giantesses, whose words often drive the narrative. The most famous of these is the Völuspá, or the Prophecy of the Seeress, a sweeping poem in which a Völva recounts the entire history of the cosmos, from creation to Ragnarok. The entire mythological framework of the Norse world is presented through the voice of a woman. Women were also associated with the magical power of language. The Galda, or magical chants, were often performed by women. It was believed that their words could heal the sick, curse an enemy, or see into the future. This connection between the female voice and mystical power suggests that women were seen not just as storytellers, but as conduits to other realms. So, while you may not have carved runes or written on vellum, your voice was one of the most powerful tools in your society. You were the weaver of stories, the singer of songs, and the historian of the heart. You were the one who ensured that the legacy of the Vikings was not lost to the silence of the past. The world was changing. By the 10th and 11th centuries, the old ways of the Vikings were beginning to fade, replaced by a new force sweeping across Europe: Christianity. This was not just a shift in religion. It was a profound cultural transformation that would fundamentally alter the role and status of women in Norse society. The conversion was a slow, often violent process. Christian missionaries arrived, backed by newly converted kings, who saw the new faith as a tool for consolidating power and building alliances with the rest of Christian Europe. The old gods were demonized, the sacred groves were cut down, and the temples were replaced with wooden churches. For a Viking woman, this change brought both new opportunities and new restrictions. On one hand, Christianity brought an end to certain brutal pagan practices. The exposure of unwanted infants was forbidden, and the practice of sacrificing slaves at their master's funeral was abolished. The Church also brought a new emphasis on the sanctity of marriage, condemning the casual polygamy and concubinage that had been common among wealthy Viking chieftains. In theory, a woman was now her husband's equal in the eyes of God, but this new faith also brought with it a set of patriarchal values that were, in some ways, more restrictive than the old pagan ways. The powerful, independent female figures of Norse mythology, Freya, the Völva, the Shield Maiden, were replaced by the submissive, chaste ideal of the Virgin Mary. Women were increasingly seen as sources of sin and temptation, their bodies and their sexuality to be controlled. The Church stripped women of their traditional spiritual authority. The Völva and the female keepers of folk magic were branded as witches. The right to divorce, which had been relatively straightforward under Norse law, became much more difficult, controlled by male priests and bishops. Women's access to property and inheritance also began to erode under new, church-influenced legal codes. The Longhouse, once the domain where a woman ruled as husfreyja, was slowly replaced by a new social order centered around the parish church, an institution run exclusively by men. As the Viking Age drew to a close, the world of the Norse woman was caught between two tides. The old world of fierce independence and mystical power was receding, and a new world of piety, submission, and a more constrained domesticity was rolling in. While the violence and uncertainty of the pagan era may have lessened, so too did some of the remarkable freedoms and authorities that Viking women had once fiercely held. How do we know what we know about the lives of Viking women? We can't ask them. The sagas give us stories, but they are filtered through the lens of time and authorship. The truest, most honest voices we have are the ones that speak to us from beyond the grave, through the silent language of archaeology. The objects a woman was buried with tell us a profound story about her life, her status, and what her community valued in her. The most common grave goods found with female skeletons are the tools of their trade, a testament to the central importance of their domestic labour. We find spindle whorls, the small weighted discs used for spinning thread, a skill essential to the Viking economy. We find loom weights, the clay or stone pieces that held the warp threads taut on the loom, reminding us of the countless hours spent weaving. We find needles and cases made of bone, scissors, and smooth glass stones used for pressing linen. These are not glamorous objects, but they are symbols of immense power. They are the tools of production, the instruments that clothed families and outfitted longships. We also find the symbols of her authority as the mistress of the house. Keys are a frequent discovery in female graves, often ornate and worn prominently. A woman buried with her keys was being honoured for her role as the manager and guardian of the household's wealth. Sickles for harvesting and iron cooking pots also appear, reinforcing her connection to the sustenance and nourishment of her family. And then there is the jewellery. Oval brooches, used to fasten the straps of their overdresses, are one of the most iconic artefacts of the Viking Age. They are often found in pairs, one on each shoulder, and are intricately decorated with complex animal and geometric patterns. Strings of glass and amber beads often stretch between the brooches, a vibrant display of colour and wealth. We find rings, armbands, and pendants, some made of silver imported from the Islamic world, a sign of the vast trade networks in which these women participated. The very materials of their graves speak to us. DNA analysis has revealed that some women were buried in clothes made of silk from the east, or adorned with furs from the far north. Isotope analysis of their bones and teeth can tell us where they grew up and what they ate, revealing stories of migration and a surprisingly varied diet. These graves are not just holes in the ground, they are biographies in bone and bronze. They show us women who were weavers, managers, healers and artists, women who were valued not just for the children they bore, but for the civilization they built. One thread, one key, one carefully crafted object at a time. The sagas are the great literary treasures of the Viking Age, a collection of epic tales filled with heroes, monsters, feuds, and voyages. And while they are overwhelmingly focused on the deeds of men, they are also populated by some of the most complex, powerful, and unforgettable female characters in all of world literature. These are not simple, one-dimensional figures. They are proud, passionate, and often terrifyingly intelligent women who drive the narrative with their words, their schemes, and their unyielding will. Take Gudrun Osvifsdotter, the tragic heroine of the Laxdæla saga. Described as the most beautiful woman in Iceland, she is also fiercely proud and intelligent. She is at the centre of a tragic love triangle that leads to a devastating blood feud, but she is never a passive victim. She is an active participant in her own fate, her decisions shaping the lives and deaths of the men around her. In her old age, when asked who she loved the most, she replies, "To him I was worst whom I loved most. It is a line of breathtaking emotional complexity, a testament to a life of passion and regret. Then there is Brynhilda, the Valkyrie from the Volsunga saga. She is a supernatural warrior, a shield maiden of immense power, who is tricked into marrying the wrong man. Her story is one of betrayal, jealousy, and a rage so profound that it leads to the death of the hero Sigurd, the man she truly loves. Brynhilda is a force of nature, a woman who refuses to be a pawn in the games of men and gods, even if it means destroying everything she holds dear. We also see women as powerful matriarchs and legal minds. In Njal's saga, the wise and respected Njal is married to Bergthora, a woman of iron will who refuses to back down in a feud, even when it costs her sons. She chooses to die beside her husband in their burning longhouse, rather than accept a life of dishonor. Her loyalty and her stubborn pride are the unwavering moral center of the saga. These women are not idealized. They are often portrayed as inciters, goading their male relatives to violence to uphold the family's honor. They are cunning, they are manipulative, and they can be just as ruthless as any male warrior. They are portrayed as fully human, with all the flaws and virtues that entails. The sagas, written by men, may not give us a perfect picture of the average Viking woman's life, but they give us something equally valuable, a glimpse into the female archetypes that the Norse themselves respected and feared. They show us that in their worldview, women could be the catalysts of history, the weavers of fate, and the architects of both glorious triumphs and devastating tragedies. We began this journey by challenging the popular image of the Viking woman, the ubiquitous shield maiden in leather armor. It's an image that is both empowering and deeply misleading. While the evidence for female warriors exists, to focus solely on them is to miss the far more common and in many ways more profound story of the average Norse woman. The modern obsession with the shield maiden is understandable. It taps into our desire for strong female heroes, for women who break the mold and fight alongside men. But in romanticizing the warrior, we risk devaluing the quiet, relentless strength of the millions of women whose battlefield was the home, whose weapon was the loom, and whose victories were measured in surviving another winter. The horned helmet is another persistent myth that needs to be buried. Vikings did not wear horned helmets into battle. This image was largely an invention of 19th century romantic artists, particularly in opera, who wanted to create a more dramatic and barbaric look for their Norse characters. A real Viking helmet was a simple, conical cap made of iron or leather, designed for function, not fantasy. A horn on your helmet is a great way to get it caught on a branch, or, worse, grabbed by an enemy. Another misconception is that Viking society was a lawless free-for-all. While it was certainly violent, it was governed by a complex legal system, the lög. As we've seen, women had specific legal rights under this system, including the right to own property and initiate divorce. They were not simply chattel. To paint them as powerless victims is to erase the agency and authority they did possess. We also often project modern ideas of love and romance onto the past. While love and affection certainly existed, marriage in the Viking Age was primarily a strategic and economic contract. The idea of marrying for love was a foreign concept. A woman's duty was to her family and her clan, and her marriage was a tool to serve their interests. By peeling back these layers of myth and misconception, we don't diminish the Viking woman. We reveal her in her true complexity. She was not a one-dimensional action hero. She was a farmer, a weaver, a manager, a mother, a healer, and a keeper of culture. Her strength was not always loud and flashy, but it was the very foundation upon which the Viking world was built. To understand her is to understand the true meaning of resilience. So, after this journey through the smoky longhouses, the frozen fields, and the treacherous waters of the Viking Age, what is the final verdict? Life for a Viking woman was, by any modern standard, brutal. It was a life of unending labour, of constant risk, and of profound limitations. You were born into a world that might discard you at birth, married off as a teenager in a business deal, and expected to work from dawn until dusk every single day of your life. You face the terror of childbirth without medicine, the anxiety of watching your loved ones sail into the unknown, and the constant, simmering threat of violence and feud. You were denied a formal voice in the assemblies that decided your fate, and your spiritual power was often confined to the mystical fringes of society. And yet, to see these women only as victims is to do them a grave disservice. Within the rigid confines of their world, they carved out realms of immense power and influence. They were the masters of the household, the guardians of the economy, and the engines of production. They held the keys, both literally and metaphorically. They were legally recognized individuals who could own property and stand up for themselves in ways that were revolutionary for their time. They were healers, artists, and historians, the silent weavers of the social and cultural fabric. They were the pioneers who settled new worlds, and the matriarchs who commanded the respect of entire clans. They were the backbone of Norse society, the unyielding anchor that allowed the longships to sail and the sagas to be sung. Their strength was not the explosive, glorious strength of a warrior in battle. It was the quiet, enduring, relentless strength of a mountain weathering a storm. It was the strength to survive, to create, to manage, to nurture, and to endure. So, forget the horned helmets and the leather corsets. The true Viking woman was far more formidable. She was the one who kept the fire burning, the one who wove the cloth, the one who raised the children, and the one who remembered the stories. She was the one who made the Viking Age possible. And her legacy is not written in runes on a stone, but in the unbreakable spirit of survival that echoes through the centuries.